Welcome back to Blowout. I am your host, Heddle's publisher, David Shuck, and this is our new podcast format where every episode we explore one article of clothing right down to the seams to tell you why it's important, where it came from, how it's made, who's making them today, how to take care of it, and the real reason you're here, at least a couple fun facts that you can annoy your friends and significant others with. So, they say all clothing is a type of language. Even refusing to participate in the conversation is a way to say something. Whether you're in a top hat and tails, or a Canadian tuxedo, or you're completely naked, it's all saying something about you and how you chose to present yourself. But some clothes speak a little louder than others, and today we're talking about arguably the loudest and most explicit types of clothing of them all. That's right, it is graphic tee time, the shirt that literally spells out its message for you right across your chest for anyone who cares to read it. They may feel like the most ubiquitous item in the world, and that's because they are, with an estimated 8 billion of them produced every year, but they've been around for less than 100 years. So let's get ready to dive on into the graphic tee and how it took over our eyes and our chests. And as with all things, we have to get into the history, and before we get to the graphic part, let's first discuss the tee, because t-shirts have only been around for maybe 100 years, 150, not much longer than that. As before the t-shirt, people just wore long underwear, sort of those things that you would see an old-timey prospector wearing in a cartoon, with the butt flap and all that. Because before the late 1800s, most workers labored outside. They were plowing fields, milling grain, building ships, and underwear was something that they needed to keep them warm mostly. But then come the Industrial Revolution, people went inside to work in factories, and it got very hot around all those machines. So they split the Union suit long john thing in half into just this top half of a Henley that you could wear as this lightweight base layer while you were around all these hot steam boilers and coal furnaces. But eventually the sleeves got short and the buttons ebbed away, and by 1900 we had the first sort of modern-looking crewneck t-shirts. Fun fact, the first written use of the term t-shirt was in 1920 in F. Scott Fitzgerald's debut novel This Side of Paradise, which was about rich youths listening to jazz music and drinking lime gin rickies throughout the evening. And the word t-shirt came in part of a packing list that the main character put together when he went away to Princeton University. I got a quote here of, "So, in September, Amory, provided with 6 suits summer underwear, 6 suits winter underwear, 1 sweater or t-shirt, 1 jersey, 1 overcoat, winter, etc., set out for New England, the land of schools." Other note about This Side of Paradise, it is also the first time anyone used the word wicked to mean good instead of evil, as in, my boy's wicked smart. So I apologize, massholes, you did not come up with this one. This was something that F. Scott Fitzgerald, a native of Minnesota, actually coined. But back to t-shirts. The graphic side of things didn't come into the picture until World War II, as plain white tees at this point were commonly worn by men as undergarments and athletic gear, and as such, the United States military issued them to soldiers during training camps. But in the same way that soldiers took to painting their boats, tanks, planes, jackets, etc., they also started decorating their t-shirts with custom logos and lettering to represent their units, bases, deployments, or whatever image of Rita Hayworth really got them going. And the method of putting on these graphics was just using paint and stencils, a practice the military had used for decades to marking footlockers and vehicles or really anything else that they wanted numbered and lettered. And adding graphics to t-shirts may have trickled slowly into civilian practice after the war as veterans returned home, but there was one very iconic Life magazine cover from July 13th, 1942, which caused them to explode into the popular consciousness. Oh, on the cover of this issue of Life magazine was a soldier training at the Army Air Corps Gunnery School in Nevada, which you can tell from the cover because his shirt says in big block letters, Air Corps Gunnery School, Las Vegas, Nevada. And then there's a small drawing of what looks like a winged toad firing a machine gun while like going nuts in the middle of it. So this image may not seem super crazy to us today, but the image was a light bulb for the general public. The idea that a t-shirt could be decorated with some form of art or name or phrase or idea and worn as an independent garment, just walking around advertising that, was now out there in the ether, and the genie was not going back into the lamp. But as I mentioned, there was kind of a bottleneck with getting these things made. Military graphic tees were all handmade in small batches and sometimes individually, meaning that this was done sort of like tattooing rather than anything like, printing for the amount of time that it took. And not everyone had as much time to sit around and do arts and crafts as the members of our military. So the spread of graphic tees was still quite limited. For graphic tees to truly go global, makers needed to be able to push them out by the thousands. And the solution came in the form of screen printing and plastisol ink. So, you've probably heard of screen printing before, but here is a basic primer on how screen printing is done and why this was such a revolution in the late 1940s. Because, as I was saying, you have these things as stencils, and you just basically had to make a cardboard cutout and then hand paint this thing and make sure that the edges were done correctly, that it was dried on properly, it didn't wash off whenever you had to wash the shirt or something. But screen printing, that could be, scaled up to sort of exponential levels. So, say you have a drawing of a pair of jeans that you've done and you want to put it on like 100 t shirts. You want to make a pants shirt. So, you take a picture of the drawing, you take a photograph of it with a really, really high contrast film. So, all you have is lights and darks on your photo of the jeans drawing. You've got, the outline, you've got the little like faded bits of it. You can maybe see the button, but it's something that is just really black and white. Then you take a very fine piece of mesh, like a mesh fabric, something that stretches out, the size of your shirt that you want to put the image on, and you cover it with a thin layer of light sensitive emulsion, which you may have heard that term before, but it's just this goop that dries hard when exposed to a bright light. So you cover your thin mesh fabric with all of this emulsion. And then you project your photo that you took of the jeans, the contrasty black and white one. You project that onto the emulsion soak screen with a really bright light. So after a couple of hours, everywhere that the light hit dries, but where the dark lines of the photo blocked, the black parts of it blocked the light out, that area stayed wet. So you can wash the still wet emulsion away, leaving you with a screen of the inverse image of your jeans drawing. So you've got, everything else blocked off, but the area of the mesh that's still exposed is just where you have your jeans. So you place that screen onto the surface of your shirt, dab a little bit of this like fancy new plastisol PVC suspension ink onto your screen, and you scrape it across to push the ink just through the mesh onto the tee. And then you can just put that t-shirt into a like low oven to bake and set the ink onto it. The plastisol ink will set under low temperature. And then you could just repeat that process as many times as you want. You just like put some ink on the top, scrape it across, and you have got as many t-shirts as you want. And if you want to make another image, you could put another one on top of that, or you could do it in another place on the back of the t-shirt. Or if you just wanted to reset from that screen and start all over again, there are chemicals that you can just wash away the emulsion and then put a new amount of emulsion on it, put a new image projected onto it, and wham bam, you have got a new image that you can project and print onto any t-shirt you want. Or, this is screen printing. You can do it on paper or on plastic or fabric or like anything that you like. Yeah, screen printing really, really broke a lot of boundaries for what people could do. And suddenly what took a bunch of guys sitting around on base for weeks could be done by one person in a workshop in an afternoon. So tees started to get a lot bigger. The first political campaign to use a printed tee was the presidential campaign of Thomas Dewey in 1948. The t-shirt that he had made was sort of this abstract woodcut of his face with the slogan, "Do it with Dewey," down the side. And, he famously lost with that. You may know the historical tidbit of Truman holding up the paper saying Dewey defeats Truman, even though he actually won because the paper got it wrong. But I think you can lay the blame for Dewey losing more on that lecherous slogan than the t-shirt, as Eisenhower and Kennedy both used slogan tees in their campaigns and won. There's got Eisenhower with "I like Ike," and I think Kennedy's was like the wave of the future or something similar to that. And once it took off in political circles, the world of merchandise followed shortly behind it, and it just explodes from there. So Walt Disney, the Mickey Mouse tee, that is like sort of the one of the more iconic original graphic tees you can think of. So he wanted a way to promote Disneyland after it opened in 1955, and he partnered with a company called Tropics Togs to produce a ringer tee with Mickey on it. And they have just made millions and millions of these things. Tropics Togs, like Mr. Tropics Togs, like his grandchildren are still skating off this probably, 80 years later. The Beatles manager, Brian Epstein, famously signed away the merchandising rights for literally anything and everything because, in his mind, he thought, like, well, if you put the Beatles on blenders or on hubcaps or whatever, that's an image of the Beatles and that's going to sell more records and concert tickets, so whatever. One of those deals ended up making the Beatles some of the first band t shirts, and everybody wanted to have a Beatles t shirt to show that they loved the Beatles. And then school sports teams, they started making their own for players and on practice squads. The thing of like property of athletic department XXL. They did that so people stopped stealing their t shirts, and then they started selling those t shirts because people wanted them so badly. And these t-shirts started bleeding into the countercultural world. Andy Warhol was one of the biggest proponents of screen printing, and he made all these irreverent t-shirts and all these images of Mao that he did on canvas for screen printing, but he also put like Marilyn Monroe and soup cans on t-shirts for things that just people around his own little clique could wear, showing that they were members of this group. Civil rights and anti-Vietnam War activists printed their own too. The Black Panthers famously had really, really cool t-shirts, some of which are still being reprinted today. And you also had things like Che Guevara, the anti-imperialist activist and revolutionary, his image on a t-shirt, another one of those seminal things that young people just couldn't get enough of. But all of this was just sort of small potatoes awaiting the big technological leap in 1969 when one man named Michael Vasilitone invented the dual rotating printing press. So this was a thing of like you still had to have someone that kind of knew what they were doing to set up emulsion and scrape the ink and print correctly. The dual rotating printing press basically idiot proofed all of this. It was sort of like the conveyor belt pizza oven that allowed Domino's to become a thing. This was just like you put your t-shirt on a conveyor belt and it went through the machine and the print came out pretty much perfect every time. The tea market truly blew up, that every tourist destination on the planet soon got their own souvenir t-shirt. Designers like Vivienne Westwood took the graphic tee to high fashion with her punk and anti-fascist designs. And then soon after that, big brands just like sold tees right out again because you had things like Calvin Klein jeans just slapping their logo on a t-shirt and the like and upcharging for it. You had Coca-Cola just selling their own teas like Budweiser, Marlboro, because they saw like, wow, the margins on these things are great and it's free advertising. Why would we not do this? Activists and things like charity t-shirts started becoming a big thing, like PBS, Keith Haring, the ACLU. They made their own tees to raise money for their own programming and their own projects. And this is sort of also, you saw the offshoot of the tote bag because, hey, it's not only a t-shirt, you have to size those. Tote bags, anyone can do those. You could send literally everyone the same thing. And pretty soon, by the mid 80s, any local burger joint or skate shop or blog could make their own tee with their own graphic to say whatever they like, and any of their fans could broadcast it to anyone that happened to come in contact with them. And, here we are in 2025. I think it is pretty safe to say that graphic tees are sticking around and we are just sort of inundated with them everywhere that you turn. Graphic tees are here to stay. So wow, that was a lot of information, and I specifically didn't get into the weird sexist Abercrombie tees or the wave of ironic threadless tees of the 2000s. Millennials will understand the struggle of that period. But here we are, we're getting into the section of where we tell you where you can find the thing that we're talking about. And it kind of feels weird to do this for graphic tees because they're literally everywhere. Like, I think this is an item where anyone who listens to this episode already owns at least 3, or there's a good chance that you're wearing one while you're listening to this. And because it's already the most overproduced item, I would recommend the first place you look for one is already in your own closet. As at the risk of sounding extremely corny, there is nothing better than an authentic expression of yourself, and diving into probably the dozens of graphic tees you've already got can be a wonderful stroll down memory lane. I still regularly wear one from my high school track team, or I have a few from when I was in college, or I have one from like a bake sale that I went to once. And I'm wearing one that my brother got me that says Pocari Sweat on it that he got in Japan. It's like one of my favorite weird Japanese soft drinks. And I think they serve as like weird little postcards of our lives, and some I wouldn't trade for the world. So have a look. You probably have a few. The flip side of this is if you want more is just go out and do things and you will probably get some t-shirts whether you want them or not. If you find something that you care enough to go volunteer about, like knocking on doors for a ballot measure or like hanging out with dogs at a local shelter or joining a mutual aid group, they'll probably give you a t-shirt if you stick around long enough. I just did an excessively long run called the Run Against Ice through LA a few weeks ago. Is I was not in any shape to run the 15 miles of this thing, but I really wanted a t-shirt that said Run Against Ice. So I did the thing, I endured the pain, and now I have the t-shirt. And any tee that you earn authentically will automatically be cooler than any one that you don't, that you just sort of, buy at a Goodwill or pay top dollar for at a vintage store. Is these are wearable badges for things that you hopefully want someone to talk to you about. Is that's literally the point of wearing them, of wearing something with a message on it, is someone else receives it and maybe interacts with you about it. But if you do want vintage, I would recommend the usual spots like thrift stores, eBay, but unless you're after specific graphics, like Peanuts or Mickey Mouse or the Beatles or band tees or something like that, I often shop the label and not the graphic within reason, which sounds weird, but like an old made in USA Velvet Sheen or Russell or Champion or even Fruit of the Loom or Hanes are usually high quality teas. Just check and see if the label is made in USA, if it's 100% cotton or if it's 50-50. Those are usually the good ones. But yeah, just know what you're looking for and try not to get duped by judging off of those tags. But if you do want some repros of the super early style of graphic tees, like the ones from World War II or around that era that I was talking about, boy, do I have some Japanese names for you. So the first one is Barnes, spelled just like it sounds. They're probably my favorite because they have some of the strangest and most varied amount of reprographic tees. They've got extremely like stitch for stitch accurate repros of university and military tees of like, Alabama football practice squad from 1958. They've got that for some reason. They've got Charlie Brown and Peanuts repros. They've got a repro of the poster tee from the movie E.T. in 1982. And they've even got this one that I have thought about buying a couple times that's it's totally inscrutable as it just says, "Pretty please, sure thing." Sure thing is one word, but it is in the Krispy Kreme donuts logo. I don't understand them, and I hope I never do, but their quality is pretty outstanding. You can find them at Hinoya. The next one would be Buzz Rixon's, which are also out of Japan. Everything on here is going to be out of Japan, just FYI. They make extremely accurate and detailed military graphic repros. They do, the repro stitch for stitch things of like pretty much any military jacket or pant or boot that you can think of. But their t-shirts, they go from the most general of ones that just say US Army all the way to ones that are recreating specific unit tees that were made during World War II that were for the Flying Tigers or the Jolly Rogers or even the U.S. Naval Training School for Aviation Maintenance in Norman, Oklahoma. That is a real tee that they are making that you can buy from Buzz Rixon's. They're also at Hinoya. Then another repro would be the Real McCoys. They also make military tees. But one of the things that I appreciate from them is that they've made it their mission to reproduce insanely high quality versions of pretty much every t-shirt that Paul Newman has ever worn. And I'm really impressed by that. I'm really fascinated by it. They've got one that he wore that says, "Get really stoned, drink wet cement," which is, just something like your uncle would wear. And they've got one that costs like $130 because they have made the ultimate version of that shirt. You can find that stuff at Lost and Found. And then finally, there is a brand called Human Made, which is sort of halfway between a heritage and a streetwear brand. It was founded by a guy named Nigo, who is the creative force behind the Japanese streetwear brand A Bathing Ape. And this is his new brand where all the production is done by the extremely well regarded Japanese denim brand Warehouse. And he does all the designing and the graphics, or his team does. So their tees are as good as anyone's, and their graphics smelled like early Carhartt branding, Mallard Ducks, Luchador Wrestling. There was still like an entire arc that they did of just like burgers and fries on t-shirts. They looked really cool. It's fun stuff. Oh, if you want to talk about maintaining your tees, I mean, it's a t-shirt. It's pretty straightforward. Just don't bleach it, and you should be all right. Perhaps hang dry if you really care about the design. The dryer is always the most damaging of anything that you put through the laundry. Maybe don't wear the ones that you really, really like or really want to treasure the design, as those wearing it and washing it is going to make it fade more than the tee itself. So I see a really big resurgence coming in graphic tees, especially when so many different subgenres of style have flattened to the point where how you're dressed doesn't necessarily say a lot about who you are as a person. That you could have someone, wearing workwear to their job where they do finance. You could have someone wearing athleisure, but they're a mailman. Graphic tees are pretty explicit. If you see someone wearing an ACAB t-shirt versus like a MAGA t-shirt, you kind of know what they're about. And we're getting to a point politically where people want to make statements again for good reason. Like, I really love my Run Against ICE t-shirt. It's cool to have that in LA. So you listened all the way to the end of this episode and you didn't even get a lousy t-shirt. But now you know how to screen print, so you can get out there and you can make your own, and you can send one back to me for this episode. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or any topics that you'd like to hear covered, please let us know at blowout@heddles.com. Just want to have some quick credits that today's episode featured writing from Brad Lanfear's 2023 article, History and Evolution of the Graphic Tee, which you can read on Heddles. And it also featured the production talents of one Sean Thornton. So until next time, keep it real and keep it raw. Bye-bye.